This is Sam Long.
I'm Ron Peters.
And I'm John Newton.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
After class.
Thanks for joining us. Another episode of the After Class Podcast. We're glad to have you along. I've been choked up already. Well, I had a Snickers ice cream bar before, and I think there's a peanut stuck in my throat. It's fine.
Wash it down with
And not with the dirty nooge. I'm good.
Okay.
Well, if it's a regular news, you'd be all right, but not the
Yes,
dirty stuff.
correct.
You can hardly taste the espresso.
I disagree. So, anyway, here we are. We have tons of stuff going on at the end of the semester, as is often the case. One such activity last night, we had our annual film fest where students put together various cinematic instant classics for the for the edification of the rest of the student body.
At the very least, the entertainment.
Yeah, yes, entertainment over edification for sure.
Yeah.
So there was fun. There were probably 10 or so submissions from
Roughly?
from about 10 seconds to 5.5 minutes. So.
And they were I thought this year they were really strong.
Pretty good.
Like
Yeah.
thematically developed, like crazy. Even when people didn't use their cameras well,
Which
they
was-
had thoughtful
Yeah.
plot lines and they were creative and
Yeah, I wish they had done better with the cinematography.
Yeah.
That would have been nice.
Well,
But
especially the audio part of it.
Yes, the audio's the
like
worst.
when Todd was filming his, some of us helped him with his video. I said, Todd, you got to redo the vocals, post production. You got to add them back in. He's like, oh, it's hard to line it up and everything. I'm like, but nobody's going to be able to hear it. And sure enough, half the audio you couldn't hear. And I said, Todd, this is why you should have done this. We could have made it really easy.
and one of the films they actually did the subtitles.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which like a lot of the adults in the room were like, "Thank you.
Yes.
This is the only way we know how to watch TV."
all the
anymore."
people over 40 were like, amen.
Yeah. This is
Yeah.
just how I normally watch TV.
So, yeah, there's definitely some fun things. I'm sure that they will be well, not sure. Ideally, they'll be posted at some point on some channel somewhere. But,
Yeah.
Speaking of posted,
Oh,
yes, one of the videos revolved around Post-it notes, trademark involved there, where a couple of
3M.
seniors did a sort of homage to the three of us
Yep.
by Post-it noting our offices with 3,600 Post-it notes total, if I recall was the number.
yeah.
wow.
That was a crazy number.
So there was a lot of Post-it notes in our offices when we walked in on Monday morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it must have taken them forever because the floors, the desks, the windows, bookcases, everything was just covered. Monitors. And I'm like, wow, to get all those Post-it notes up, you guys had to have worked for a couple of hours.
And they turned it into a video for the
Yep.
film fest, which was actually a very nice thing. It was a kind of what do you call it? An homage to us, or at
Yeah.
least a nod
of.
to our investment into their
Yeah.
lives.
Something along
Tribute of sorts.
Sure, tribute. But so it was fun and nice, and it didn't take too long to clean up.
that. When I walked in, my first thought was, I don't think I like people liking me.
Yeah.
I think I'd be happy with people hating me because then I just leave my stuff alone.
Oh, there's plenty of those.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure there are. Of that I
Yeah,
have
they
no
did
doubt.
not make videos for you or us.
Theirs are on TikTok, lamenting.
The most bizarre thing is among the Post-it notes on my secondary desk in my office was a long silver hair,
Yeah.
which totally threw me off because I thought, Ron, why would Ron do this?
Yeah,
That's
Ron
way
would
too
never
much
do that.
for Ron to
No.
do something like this. But long silver hair, who has that? And but it wasn't long enough. It wasn't
That's just what I was going
quite
to say.
long enough.
It was longer, but not even close to being my
Yeah.
length.
But apparently, no one has a clue of how that got there because there were 4 guys in the offices at any given time, and none of them had silver hair or
Right.
long hair.
Long hair, exactly.
So, and I thought, well, maybe they started in your office, somehow picked up a hair, and then stuck to a note, and then stuck that note in my office. But they did your office last,
Right.
so there's no explanation
Yeah.
except you maybe just hair on my desk for some reason. I don't know.
It just kind of wafted into your office.
Sorry,
The
I
door
do
was
that
open.
sometimes.
Yeah, it was bizarre. You
I
know
collect
what?
hair and put it on
That
there.
could be a Steve Bush hair. Come to
Okay,
think of
you
it,
know what? You're
because
right.
sometimes he's in my office hanging
And his
out.
hair's,
He teaches
it's
for
a
us.
little bit on the longer side. So,
Yeah, it's probably about that length.
do you still have it? Can you do a DNA sample on it?
It may be in the garbage can, but probably Ixnay on the sample A.
Well, quite the conundrum, and the audience is enthralled. So we'll move on.
That's
from
our big
that.
news.
Yes.
And there's tons of other special events happening tomorrow and the day after and the day after and
Yep.
the day after until people leave campus for good.
Yep.
But we'll update you on that next week.
Yes, we will.
So, yeah. So here we are. I think today we think we're going to wrap up the Old Testament. We're doing our series on creation care. What does the Bible say about, what does God say about creation? What is his interaction with creation, and what kind of responsibility does God give us with his creation? And today we wrap up the Old Testament by switching to the Psalms and wisdom literature. And if by some miracle we get done on the early side, we might even break into the Gospels and Acts.
Sure. We'll do our best. We're going to try to speed things up a little bit because at this point we've laid out most of the material.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to begin in Psalm 19, verses 1 through 6. It says, "The heavens are telling the glory of God. The firmament proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. Yet their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In the heavens he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom from his wedding canopy, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and nothing is hid from its heat." And so this is just a nice little setup of God, the creator, and the cool things that God has done, that basically you can't help but look outside and see God's glory revealed through all the things that happen in the heavens and the earth, all the way to the ends of the earth. And I think anyone who has watched a sunrise or sunset could agree to that. That's pretty awesome, that this world that God has created.
Yeah. And I guess that would have implications for how we were to relate to creation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not just resources to be used for our whims. There are also things in and of themselves that point to God's glory. So when we are abusing creation, we're kind of abusing pointers to his glory.
Amen. Next passage, Psalm 24, verses 1 and 2. Excuse me. "The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. For he has founded it on the seas and established it on the rivers." I just see this reinforcing what we said before, the idea of us being tenants, that nobody can really claim ownership of anything. Even if the government says you own this piece of land or whatever, that really it all belongs to God. And so I just think this reinforces that central idea that whatever our relationship is to the land and the creation, we should see ourselves as stewards and tenants rather than the owners.
Yeah. Not much to add to that.
Not much, yeah.
Yeah.
I actually opened my part of Senior Sim today using this as a prayer, Psalm 24,
Oh,
but for a
nice.
different purpose, which is what comes next. That's an aside.
Gotcha.
What comes next, as in Psalm 96?
No,
Oh.
it's the rest of Psalm 24.
Gotcha. Well, I'll be reading from Psalm 96.
Can't wait.
10 to 13. "Say among the nations, the Lord is king. The world is firmly established. It shall never be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. Let the heavens be glad and the earth rejoice. Let the sea roar and all that is in it. Let the field exult and everything in it. Then shall all the trees of the forest sing for joy before the Lord, for he is coming. For he is coming to judge the earth. He will judge the world with righteousness and the peoples with his truth." It's kind of a different angle, what we've seen in previous verses. This little poem is about the kingship of Yahweh, right? And, the word for Lord there is the specific personal name of Israel's God. And there's this beginning statement about he has established this world and it shall never be moved. And we've seen verses to that effect of the constancy of this creation because it's in God's hands. But this is framing his function as king and specifically as judge. When he comes to judge the earth, and he does it with fairness, and he will come and judge the earth, and he will judge it fairly, and you have the heavens, the sea, the field, and trees rejoicing in God's justice and righteousness. So, question, what function does that kind of thing play in the Israelite mind? Right? Like, God is coming to judge, and all of inanimate creation is kind of stepping up to rejoice in God's judgment. What does that mean if you're an Israelite singing this song?
I wonder if it doesn't harken back to, again, the reversal of the effects of the fall. I mean, imagine being a plant that can't fully grow because of sin in the world. And now you're going to be able to because God is going to remove that. I don't know if that's in their minds or not, but that's what I think of, not being an Israelite. Of course, being a partial Jew.
As close as you can get here.
Right. And because this idea of course they're going to be happy. Like, and it reminds me of like Romans 8, where creation, we're probably going to get to that down the road. But creation groans, but now when God comes back to set the world aright, now they're not going to groan; they're going to celebrate. And the trees are going to not clap their hands, but they're going to sing. So that's
Yeah.
a little change there. But so that's what I think of, is that that's the reason they're celebrating, is because the world's going to be made right again.
Yeah, I thought a very similar thing. It makes me think about what we said about the flood, where inanimate creation suffers the consequence of human sin. And so when it comes time to judge human sin, inanimate creation says, hooray, we are no longer going to have to suffer the effects. Whether it's a global flood or a local judgment or whatever it may be, the days of that happening are in the past, and now we can look forward to a better future.
Yeah. And I suppose the implication would also be that if all of creation, even inanimate, rejoices, celebrates, longs for God's justice to be established in the earth, how much more those who are made in God's image,
Yeah.
who bear his likeness, that we should be leading in that that chorus of celebration and praise.
Yep, join with creation in singing the praises of God, the judge who's come back.
Yep.
All right. I'm humming right along here. Psalm 104. This is a longer hymn to God as creator, and we're not going to read the entirety of the 35 verses, but we are going to read 20. So we're going to start in verse 1. It says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with honor and majesty, wrapped in light as with a garment. You stretch out the heavens like a tent. You set the beams of your chambers on the waters. You make the clouds your chariot. You ride on the wings of the wind. You make the winds your messengers, fire and flame your ministers. You set the earth on its foundations, so that it will never be shaken. You cover it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they flee. At the sound of your thunder they take to flight. They rose up to the mountains, ran down to the valleys, to the place that you appointed for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so they might not again cover the earth. You make the springs gush forth in the valleys. They flow between the hills, giving drink to every wild animal. The wild asses quench their thirst. By the streams the birds of the air have their habitation. They sing among the branches. From your lofty abode you water the mountains. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of your work. You cause the grass to grow for the cattle and the plants for the people to use, to bring forth food from the earth, and wine to gladden the human heart, oil to make the face shine, and bread to strengthen the human heart. The trees of the Lord are watered abundantly, the cedars of Lebanon that he planted. In them the birds build their nests. The stork has its home in the fir trees. The high mountains are for the wild goats. The rocks are a refuge for the conies. You have made the moon to mark You've made the moon to mark the seasons, the sun to know its time for setting. You make darkness, and it is night, when all the animals for the forest come creeping out. And it goes on and on, talking more about the different animals and so forth that we're not focused on as much in the study. But what he's doing is he's laying out artistically, creatively, how God created the world. And so if you compare this with the creation account, you compare it also perhaps with the flood account and the post-flood, the idea is that they believed in a world full of water, that God separates and creates area for humans and plants and animals to grow, and he does it all. And it gives him full credit for it, that God is the one who has made this and done this. And it coincides, of course, with the creation account where God speaks and these things happen and water separates and all the rest goes from there. There's an interesting, do you want to say anything about that before I pivot?
I just agreeing with you that I love that it's an expression of God's love for all of his creation. He's not anthropocentric, but rather all of his creation gets his loving care. And this psalm really acknowledges that. So I like that part of it.
Yeah, he sets up the inanimate creation kind of as the stage in which this life flourishes. And so there's only one verse really about humans, right? For the wine that gladdens the human heart, but the rest of them are going to focus on the animals. And again, like the inanimate creation's not just for us.
Yeah,
it's for the rest of the wild creatures. And so, we've talked about deforestation, that being bad because you have fruit trees and people need that fruit, but also these are abodes for wild critters.
Yeah,
who that's their space to thrive on Earth as critters, and we have to be mindful of our use of spaces because it doesn't just affect us and our economic concerns, but critters and creatures and species whose existence are at risk when we demolish their abodes.
Yeah.
It reminds me of a video I saw this week where there was a cat inside a bale of hay, just sort of keeping warm, and a horse was eating it. And the cat jumped out, and the horse did the thing where it jumps like all four legs off the ground. Like, like the little nerd's like, oh, okay, stupid cat. And then he went back to eating. It was just talking about abodes and such. Sorry.
The horse have just left it alone.
The hay?
Yes.
Well, okay. I feel like it's the horse's hay to eat, but the cat's the one that's...
So the cat is transgressing
Yes,
the horses.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
there you go.
Anyway, there's a interesting connection in Job 38 and 39, and where God comes on the scene, and he finally shows up to give Job his answer, and the answer to Job is basically this psalm, but meaner. Maybe meaner, not the right word.
Meaner, I like that.
Where were you when? I mean, if you basically put "where were you when" and then you put it here on the psalm, that's what it is. Where were you when, verse 5? When I set the foundations of the earth, right? And there's a lot of the same sort of imagery and discussion in Job 38 and 39, where he just goes through, and even more specific detail of different things that have been set up, both the world as a whole that God has created, and specific things as well, including things like seasons and water and sun and little animals and all the rest.
Right.
And they're both doing the same thing, except again one a different tone. It's just saying this is all from God. Like every little thing you see is from God. You didn't do it. In fact, you don't even know how it works, and you don't know how these animals give birth from wherever. Like it's so far beyond your recognition. And that should cause, for the psalmist, it should cause us to give praise. For Job, it should cause him to maybe repent a little bit and maybe just take a couple steps back of his questioning of God.
It's a humility moment for Job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the new thing that Job really brings forth to the topic is we've been talking about, the goodness of creation and how it's good in and of itself and how we should rejoice in it, recognize God's ownership, be a steward the way he would have us be a steward. But it also should evoke in us a humility. We are so small in comparison to God's massive creation. It just sets into perspective our role in it all. So even though we've been given dominion over the creatures, and even though we can subdue the earth, there are portions of the earth we couldn't even come close to subduing if we wanted to.
Right.
Like, who's going to subdue the ocean? It's just not going to happen. All you got to do is ride the waves on a stormy day, and you will fear the sea from that point forward.
And all those ships at the bottom of the ocean bear testimony to the fact that we have not even come close. Modern ships who still get sunk, we have not come close to subduing the ocean.
Another video I saw this week was a boat out on the open seas when there was a tsunami, and the wave rose, and they sort of rode it all the way up and then all the way down. It's like that would be crazy to see this huge wave coming at you. Unfortunately, like I said, it just rode it up and down. It didn't destroy the boat, but that'd be a scary thing.
See, I would love to experience that if I knew I was going to make it out alive.
Sure.
Right, yeah. It'd be a great experience, but it must be terrifying if you have no idea.
Oh my goodness, I couldn't imagine it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like, you're going on those really high roller coasters and you kind of stare down and you're like, oh no, how am I going to survive this? That must be what it feels like on those boats.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the amount of courage that those people have to do that, the men and women who ride those waves, knowing how dangerous it is and that you could die, it's like, I'm going to do it anyway. That is a crazy person, man. Yeah. Well, from there, we're transitioning into Proverbs.
Nope.
We're not.
A couple more from Job.
Okay, so we moved Proverbs.
We did.
We moved
We
it
changed
back.
our mind.
You were sipping coffee.
I didn't catch it. So
It's not your fault. I blame John.
Fair enough.
It's a very rare moment that you would not place the blame on me. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with that.
Too easy to pile on.
It really is. So, all right. Well, I got to flip backwards here. So go back to Job.
We're going to stay in Job, do a couple more passages from Job,
Yeah,
then
so
we'll hit
Job
Proverbs.
chapter 9 is where I'm going here. Verses 5 through 9. Job 9, verse 5. He removes mountains, and they do not know it, when he overturns them in his anger. He shakes the earth out of its place, and its pillars tremble. He commands the sun, and it does not rise. He seals up the stars. He alone stretches out the heavens and tramples the waves of the sea. He made the Bear and Orion, the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south. What I like about this one is that it's more specific to the stars and even naming some of the constellations. And maybe this is an accommodation to a modern reader because I have not read this section in Hebrew. But the idea that when you even look up at the stars, God is the one who put them in place and assigned them a function. And so when we're talking about creation care, God's care of his creation isn't limited to this globe, but to everything that we can take in visually, things that we still can't reach. We can observe them, but we certainly can't reach them. And God's like, that's nothing to me. I created that too.
So maybe more continuing that humility theme.
Yeah.
We should be humble before God's vast creation.
Right. Well, I think even more so now because, back then, they saw the stars up in the heavens, but they didn't realize just how far away they are. And nowadays, thanks to modern astronomy, we just recognize how vast this universe is. And even now, with the latest telescopes up there, we're going, wow, it's even bigger than we thought. Like some of the calculations may be off. And God still says, it's nothing to me. And so it really humbles us even more than I think it has in the past.
I got actually stuck a little bit on verse 6. He shakes the earth out of its place, its pillars tremble. I wonder if that's referring to like thunder and lightning. And just like, can you imagine? So I don't know, every once in a while I'm in the house, there's a bad storm goes through, and like it feels like the lightning is right outside the window. And like, boy, that's powerful. Imagine being in a tent. Like there's no walls.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, and that like there's a lightning strike nearby you. I mean, you got to be freaking out. And the idea of humility, like, okay, calm down, God, don't kill me, with whatever you're sending your way. And of course, which is what leads to all sorts of mythology and other understandings of thunder and lightning being the gods doing this and that, because that would have made sense to them. Like
Right.
either they're upset or they're whatever. There's they sneeze, whatever it is like causing this thing. Like I just can't imagine like the being like a lightning bolt striking right outside a tent versus a house.
And the modern mythologies of angels bowling.
Sure,
Right.
Sure.
Well, I mean, we had that last night. We had a lot of lightning at the beginning of Film Fest. When I was walking into the Doty, there was this great flash of lightning where you see the lightning bolt streaking across the sky. I'm like, wow, that was so cool.
Yep.
But within a second, you had this clap of thunder, and it was loud. Yeah. And I think it made me jump a little bit, even though I knew it was going to happen. But like when it shakes your house and you hear the dishes rattling in the kitchen, it's like, wow, that was huge.
All 4 legs off the ground.
I haven't seen I kind of want to see that video now. What does it look like when a horse gets all 4 legs off the ground? I'm kind
It's pretty fun.
intrigued by that.
I guess I always, when I read that verse, thought of earthquakes too,
Sure.
which they actually experience in
Yeah.
Palestine.
Yeah.
But to be another example of, the foundations shaking and quaking. One more verse from Job, this time chapter 12, verses 7 through 10. And this one is, the context is Job defending himself and how, he did nothing to deserve what's happening to him. And so he's invoking the creation as witness for his case, which is actually his case against God. Right? For, why is God doing this to me? So it's kind of unique. I'm not sure it's going to teach us something new. I don't know. I'll see what you guys think. So Job 12, verses 7 through 10. But ask the animals, and they will teach you, the birds of the air, and they will tell you. Ask the plants of the earth, and they will teach you, and the fish of the sea will declare to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every living thing, and the breadth of every human being. So, in other passages, God is invoking creation as his witness to why we should shut up.
That's just what I was thinking. Because this is before that. So Job's calling witnesses to the stand, and he's like, let's hear what these guys got to say. And then God comes up and says, all right, Job, let's hear what they've got to say. And Job's like, oh, shoot. My own witnesses have been turned against me.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Ask all these little animals. They'll agree with me. They know what I'm talking about. It's God's fault. You've seen it. And they're like, time out, bro.
Yeah, and God later on is going to be like, okay, let's ask like Leviathan and the behemoth.
Yeah.
You can ask your little chirpy birds.
Yeah.
I'll ask the dragons of the sea.
That's great. No, I love that.
But again, this is from, a human perspective, talking about we're not here alone. We're surrounded by this cloud of witnesses, even on the earthly plane.
Yeah.
Both animate creatures like the animals and inanimate creatures like the trees they're there witnesses to the innocence and guilt of humans all around us.
Yeah.
So I suppose this is personification. I don't think we should necessarily assume that these trees outside the window here have stories to tell.
It could be Ents, like in Lord of the Rings,
How did I know you were going to go there?
It's so obvious. How could you not know?
All right. Okay. There
Practically set it up for him.
I know.
You sure? I think it was on purpose.
Well, if you're
could
going
have gone to
pitch
the
me a
grass.
softball, you may as well just expect me to hit at it.
That's for tomorrow. Let's see if you can hit it.
I haven't played softball in a while. I usually sit those games out unless somebody really needs me to step in. And that just speaks to
I think
the
we'll be fine.
desperation. Yeah, it speaks to the desperation. Of
Senior skip day is tomorrow, and the first thing in the morning, in the frigid weather,
It'll be 40.
All right.
hopefully by then, it's going to hit 25 tonight.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's
But
gonna
yeah,
be brisk.
we're going to be playing softball against students.
Yep.
bundle up.
Us old
Good
people.
time. I think you're going to have to play this year, Ron.
Are
There's
we
a lot
really
of
that low?
injured people.
Oh yeah, Greg's got his
A lot of seniors though.
upper hand.
Well, that'll help.
Yeah.
Anyway,
We'll see.
Yeah, people don't care. We'll give you the rundown next week. We get the box scores up there. You'll love it.
the injury report.
Yes.
I
I,
mean,
I don't
right
mind
at the
being
end.
on the IR report. I got a bad neck. All right. So that is the book of Job. Its contribution to the study. There's one more from the wisdom literature we wanted to talk about, and this could take a while. It doesn't have to, but there's some interesting theology that's found in Proverbs that people have done various studies on moving forward. And it's found in,
All those promises that we have in Proverbs, that the promises are always going to come to pass.
So Proverbs chapter 8 begins talking about the role of wisdom in creation. And it says this in verse 22. The Lord created me at the beginning of his work. By the way, me is wisdom, okay? The first of his acts of long ago. Ages ago I was set up, at the first, before the beginning of the earth. Where there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills, I was brought forth. When he had not yet made earth and fields, or the world's first bits of soil. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep. When he made firm the skies above. When he established the fountains of the deep. When he assigned to the sea its limits, so the waters might not transgress his command. When he marked out the foundations of the earth. Then I was beside him, like a master worker, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing in him before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the human race. The point of this is to talk about the role of wisdom in creation. But in the midst of it, he also talks about creation and clearly attributes it to God through wisdom, sort of. Wisdom was God's, what does he call him? His worker, his master worker, kind of like the way in which God made it happen. Regardless, the author, so much personification going on, right? It's a feminine. Anyway, it talks about how we see what we see kind of in the Psalms we looked at, and even in Job. Just when God's establishing things and making all this, it's clearly God, and it's very intentional. That's one thing I also like about this is he's assigning the sea its limit, and he's making very clear. It's almost like he's got his little protractor out and figuring it out to making sure it happens, which is in tension, not intention, but in contrast to a lot of ancient Near Eastern myths where it's kind of accidental and it seems a little more slapshod thrown together, whereas God is being very precise, all using wisdom to produce this wonderful world.
Yeah, I think it speaks to God's intention for his creation, where at least ideally, everything should be working together.
Yeah.
Plants, animals, trees, human beings. There should be a level of cooperation that promotes maximum flourishing, maximum productivity, everybody getting the benefit. And that's a demonstration of wisdom. A wise God creates a world in which all things work together for the common good. And it's only sin that corrupts that, wise intention. And so, sure, wisdom would be there first, and wisdom would be God's co-worker in bringing earth to, all creation to fruition.
And this is going to have implications in other proverbs and other poems that because this earth was crafted by wisdom, you can gain wisdom by studying the creation. You just study the patterns, study the movements, study the cycles, and you too can gain wisdom. And so the earth becomes kind of our teacher. And the earth can teach us wisdom because it's through God's wisdom that the earth was created.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of wisdom theme here that we haven't really gotten in any of the other passages.
Yeah, in fact, we skipped one that talked about Solomon, who, in his wisdom, wrote about like trees and so forth. Just sat down and looked around and made his own, I don't know, botany's guide to the world or something.
Solomon's Guide to Botany.
Yeah, and the implication is, even though it's a narrative and it's talking about Solomon, it's in the context of him receiving this gift of wisdom from God, and so that's one sort of product of the wisdom that God provided him with.
Yeah. So you're in verse 30 and 31.
Yep.
You had, you have the NRSV?
I do.
So you had rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world.
Yep.
So the NRSV UE, the updated edition says, playing before him always, playing in his inhabited world.
Interesting.
So
yeah.
There's a shift there. And playing does bring a theme forward that we haven't seen in other verses. Like rejoicing, it's just like, wow, look at this awesome creation. We rejoice, the good things God has done. But playing in it, Like
Yeah.
it's this good creation is not just useful and beautiful and awe-inspiring. It's also a place to enjoy life, just to have fun,
Yeah.
to get out in God's good creation and have a good time. You know?
I
What do
looked
you-
it up. I think they got it right the second time.
Oh, yeah?
It's sahak, which has to do with laughing and playing and
Behind the name
those
Isaac?
sorts of things. Yeah, so like I think they improved on that particular translation.
And so rejoicing can be a part of playing,
Yeah.
but rejoicing narrows it down too much. Playing is more broad and probably fully captures the idea.
Well, yeah, and especially that word connotes laughter.
Yeah.
Like you're playing, you're laughing, you're having a good time.
Yeah.
And rejoicing kind of can sound like a church service, which is
Right,
not
yeah.
necessarily playful or laughing. I mean, it is joy filled. Like you're happy. You're so glad at what God's done for you. But it's not recreational. And this passage just seems more recreational.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, thinking about it, I love that imagery. I mean, when people like, I just think of like kids out playing in the sprinkler.
Yep.
They're just laughing and having a good time
Oh,
and jumping
yeah.
through it. Like, and the implication is like wisdom is there, and we're all just kind of having a good time on God's, water fountain.
His water park
Yeah.
on his splash pad.
Yeah.
yeah, and that just reminds me of my time in Hawaii. Like just going
Oh,
to
yeah.
a waterfall and like swimming out to where the falls are coming down and letting the falls beat on your head, and
Right.
others are you're trying to battle against the current so you can get underneath it, but it's like
Yeah.
pushing you out with this fierce force, and it's just a really good, enjoyable time. And our society, which has taken most of the forms of play, because humans are, I think humbled before creation, and just can't have our way with creation. Like the
Mhm.
seasons, the weather, not predictable, softball games in a freezing cold.
Right.
Like we've domesticated it so that we can guarantee ourselves to have a good time if we can make our recreation indoor.
Yeah.
So you have like Zap Zone XL,
Right.
where you can go bowling and you can play pinball, my favorite, throw axes, break things in the rage room, play all sorts of games for tickets so you can buy toys. But that's a controlled environment.
Yeah.
And it seems like in a technological society, we've gone indoor with our recreation, and this passage kind of pushes us outdoor.
Well, I think it causes us too to recognize that the solemnity that we bring to so much of life is probably inappropriate. Not that there isn't a place for being solemn. That's not the point. But when all life becomes solemn moments, where is the recreation and that unbridled joy that comes from play? That wisdom says there's a place for play. I play. And if I'm playing, you should play too.
Yeah, and wisdom here is the wisdom of God. So like God is playing with his creation. Like he's made this a play yard,
Yeah.
and we as made in his image should participate in that play.
Without a doubt.
Godly play.
Yeah.
Might call it. Well, that's it for the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And we did it. With time left. I'm amazed we did it.
So we are going to get into the Gospels. So do we want to look back at all on like basic points from the Old Testament, things that stood out?
I think we've treaded the same ground pretty well, but God created it all. God created it intentionally. God created it as he wanted. We were put in it as kind of the pinnacle of creation. I know a lot of times we think it was made for us. It doesn't seem to always be made for us, though we definitely receive great benefit from living in this world. We also can ruin creation through our sin, even though it may not be intentionally like pouring oil into a river. It's still what we do. Our sin leaches into the world and causes decay and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
That'd be some points. I don't know. There's probably others.
Yeah, it's just what I've said even today. The idea of being stewards, of being tenants on God's land. And so having a kind of love and respect, that our love and respect for God is expressed in our love and respect for his creation. It's not here for us to use, to exploit, but rather for us to understand God's intention and then align ourselves with that intention so that we can really enjoy the fruit of it the way God wants us to.
Yeah. Yeah, one other thing that stood out to me is it wasn't much about us being in charge of it.
Mm.
It's like God's in charge. We've been given land to play in. It's for us, but it's also for God's good pleasure.
Mhm.
It's also for the animals, and so I th- I came away from this time through the Old Testament thinking, man, there's even less ground than I thought for humans to think like this is ours to do what we want with.
Yeah.
It's ours. It's for us, but it's not just for us. And we don't have any unique charge to make of it whatever we want. If anything, what has been emphasized is that it's God's.
Yeah.
It's his. And there's some things he lets us do in it, but there are definite limits and bounds that we have to be faithful to.
Yep. I agree.
All right. Well, the New Testament is not going to have nearly as many references.
Right.
It's surprising how little we have in the Gospels and Acts, and I think those are what probably we'll get through today.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, and I think that the reason for that is that by this time, people just assume what the Old Testament already has to say. It's all we're really going to see is probably a reinforcing of what the Old Testament has proclaimed over and over and over again. And so the first passage we're going to look at is from Matthew chapter 6, 26 through 30. This is the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus says, "Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And which of you by worrying can add a single hour to your span of life? And why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field and how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all of his glory was not clothed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith?" And so here Jesus appeals to God's provision for inanimate, the lilies, and for the animate, the birds. And he's like, God still cares. Jesus reinforces God's care for his creation and his loving provision. And he's just trying to say to him, if that's what God does for birds and lilies, how much more is he going to do for you? We should trust God because he clearly takes care of all of his creation. So just trust him to take care of you, and he's got it covered.
Yeah, this kind of an extension of the wisdom dimension. There are a lot of passages in the Psalms and Proverbs we didn't address that were related to creation, but you can learn from creation about God. He cares for inanimate creation, just like animate creation, and we're really important to him. So we can trust that he's going to take care of us. That's wisdom, learning from the rhythms of creation, at least a little bit about what our God is like. And I think that wisdom theme is going to continue in the Gospel of John, first 3 verses, which is going to add a dimension here that it's going to seem a lot like Proverbs 8, but it's going to go further, kind of in a Christological direction. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being." And then it goes on to talk about the things that came into being, and that Word became flesh and lived among us, and it's Jesus, right?
Surprise!
But this reminds me a lot of Proverbs 8,
Yep.
right? Like wisdom, through wisdom, God made the world. Like wisdom was there in the beginning, and it's through that wisdom that God made everything. And John is saying that of Jesus. Jesus was there, at least the Word that took on flesh in the person of Jesus. That Word was there in the beginning. Through that Word, all things came into being. And so this is kind of a bridge between Jesus and the created order.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't get that, much elsewhere in the Gospels. Like the closest thing with Jesus is he has this ability to calm the storms, right? He can multiply bread. Like he can tinker with creation in ways that ordinary humans can't. But here, there's this kind of confession that all things came into being through Jesus. And we're going to see this in Hebrews 1. We're going to see this in Colossians 1, that this glorious creation, humans, animals, and the inanimate creation itself, is tied to Jesus, which means what we're learning from him, if he is the one through whom creation came into being, then the life he is setting forth for us to imitate and to embrace, his kingdom life, is from the perspective of someone who knows best how this world was meant to function.
Yep.
So like Jesus is through him creation came into being, and so we can trust that his way of inhabiting this world is the best way to live in harmony with it.
Yeah, agree. I can't add to that. I think that's spot on.
Any thoughts about that, Sam?
I mean, I guess I've probably thought about it in that way, but this idea of part of the reason Jesus was able to live the life that he did was because he understood how creation works. So his ability to not just do miracles, but also to resist sin, like he understands the created order, understands what's right and where shalom lies and where it doesn't. And anyway, just thinking about that. That's all.
Well, yeah, I guess something pops in my mind now that John understood Jesus as co-participant in creation. Paul says the same thing in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. There are other passages in the New Testament that reaffirm that. But if Jesus is co-participant, then he just gets it. This is why he's so important. Why am I a Christian and not something else? It's because Jesus isn't just a prophet. He is the Son of God. He was there at creation. And so by living here on earth, he provides us an example not only of what God looks like, but also what it means for us to be image bearers of God. And it's because of his intimate understanding of the intention behind creation, plants, animals, soil, and everything else. And so imitating Jesus is how we get back to this idea of what it means to be those image bearers, that we see in Genesis chapter 1.
Yeah. And I think this is an important theme, and it's not just a one-off in John. Like you said, there are other passages that say the same thing through different voices of Scripture, especially in the New Testament. But throughout the history of theology and moral theology and even Christian ethics, you can see a pattern of people kind of divorcing Jesus from creation. Like God the Father, Old Testament God, creation God. Jesus the Son, he's not really concerned with the order of creation. He's more about salvation and redemption and like heaven. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like some people like say like the way of Jesus is more like how you get away from this earth, how you get
Yeah.
saved from the flesh and
Right,
from the
yeah.
earth and from its corruption. And so there's actually a history in Christian theology of divorcing Jesus from creation.
Yep.
And that also divorces Old Testament from New Testament and justifies Christians kind of detaching
Yeah.
from the Old Testament's creational theology. Like we saw it in the first few chapters of Genesis, like the story of creation and fall is the story not just of humans, but of a harmony that includes all of creation. And like its fate is our fate, and it's all intertwined. And then you get people who, think, nah, all of reality is basically just about the human soul getting freed from the human body so we can get into a celestial realm. And these passages about Jesus, no, he was the one in the very beginning.
Yeah.
And this whole creation project, Jesus is tied up in it.
Yeah.
And really, since, the fall has utterly corrupted the human mind, right? And it has had disastrous consequences for all creation. We don't really have access to untampered with creation, right? We were only exposed to fallen creation. And Jesus, as being the one who created it all before it got tinkered with, and now he has taken on flesh in a flawless, sinless way. Like the Jesus that's revealed to us in Scripture is the closest thing we can get to unmolested creation.
Yeah.
Like the closest we can get to the way God intended things to be from the beginning is to look to Jesus. Which is, so I think these passages are the ultimate underscoring of, now this inanimate world, and if we were to do a study, which maybe we'll do down the road, of the little creatures of the earth and how we relate to them, like that's all up in Jesus' business. Like he was about that before he was walking the earth and teaching us how to treat one another. So it's super important.
I had something that's gone from me. Oh, well, we probably don't have time for it. But just, this idea of, but then, so Jesus is all that. That's why he's able, I think, to perform these miracles. But then he also says, you'll do greater things than these. So like, how do we get to that place where we're that connected to God's creation that we could do that? I don't know. So food for thought.
Food indeed. We're going to have to leave it there.
All right.
Yeah, we're at the up at the end of our time.
Well, thank you for joining us in this episode of the After Class podcast. After Class because
The best conversations happen.
After class.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the After Class Podcast. ACP is hosted by Sam Long, John Nugent, and Ron Peters. Audio production is provided by Drew Nyquist. Social media is managed by Darren Harris.